We interrupt NFL AM for this live coverage here on NFL Network. The NFL and the Referees Association reached a deal last night. Here's Commissioner Roger Goodell.
Commissioner, there was a lot of talk about Monday night about how much that influenced the negotiations moving forward. Can you talk about that?
You know, we were in intensive negotiations for the last 10 days. There were planned meetings. We met all through the weekend, planned meetings for Tuesday morning. I think it was just another factor that kept pushing us that this was the right thing for the game. This is the right thing to do. Get the officials back on the field, get the agreement concluded. And that was really what everyone's objective was. So I think we were already in that intensive period, and this was just another point that helped push us towards it. It just helped push us to the point where we got the agreement that we really needed to get and kept us in there. And I think there was a real pressure, I think, for everyone to get the officials back on the field this weekend. I think everybody wanted, the officials wanted to get back on. And I believe we would have reached agreement this week, regardless of Monday night or Sunday night or the past weekend. Everybody was to the point of getting this concluded.
You mentioned the intense negotiations to get what you want. Did you get what you wanted to get out of this negotiation in terms of priorities going in? And was it worth whatever sacrifice was made over the last 3-4 weeks for the replacements?
You know, Andy, you know, these negotiations are tough. Labor negotiations and labor management disputes are difficult periods. And what's most difficult about it is you have the two parties, but you have a lot of parties outside the room that get impacted by it, starting with our fans. And we're sorry to have to bring our fans through that. We're sorry to bring the general public through that. That's unfortunate part of labor management disputes. But they're also necessary to get those disputes resolved in a way that makes sense. You don't go into one of these trying to create a win-lose. You create a win-win. You're looking for a long-term agreement that people can look back and say we're proud of, and will help make officiating better, make the NFL better, and be respectful and responsive to both parties. And the officials wanted to get certain aspects of their agreement resolved here, and a lot of theirs was economic, a lot of them were work conditions, and rightfully so. On the NFL side, for my purposes, I really wanted to make sure we were going to have in place things that could help officiating for the long term. Full-time officials, having a pool of officials that we could use to develop officials, to train them and to get them on the field so that we can make officiating better going forward and make sure that the long-term interest of the game is taken care of. So it's always short-term pain, but you got to get to that long-term place.
Commissioner, there are some who say it should have never gotten to this point, that if there was a $3 million separation on the two sides in a multi-billion-dollar business, you should have worked it out before the season, that it was an embarrassment to the NFL.
Well, with all due respect, it's not just economics. I just got through talking about the last thing we discussed last night with the parties was full-time officiating. And it wasn't the first time. It was the last thing that was agreed to. The last thing that was agreed to. Because we had to work to try to get to the point of making sure the economics were in place, making sure that full-time officials was fully agreed to, how we were going to do it, and the pooling of new officials where we could train them and develop them. So that was building consensus, not just on economic issues, but on the long-term future of the game.
You said you felt pressure to get a deal done heading into this weekend. You felt like it was leaning towards that direction. Was that pressure lacking before week 1 and week 2, and why was that so?
No, I think there was a pressure on all of us to get an agreement from the get-go. I don't think anybody wanted to go into using replacement officials. I don't think the officials wanted to come off the field. But there were clear economic differences and clear differences about how to move forward with the officiating program. And I got more intensively involved just prior to the season to try to see if there were ways to resolve some of those differences. And we were really in intensive negotiations the last 10 days, but it doesn't always happen at the speed we all would like it to happen.
As a fan of football, just watching on Monday night the end of that game, what was your reaction to it?
You never want to see a game end like that, and you never want to see a game end on a controversial play. In 32 years as a league employee, that's something you always would like to see avoided. But it happens in sports. Sports are imperfect, officiating is imperfect, life's imperfect. And that's why I think we all love sports. But you always want to try to avoid those controversial plays, particularly at the end of a game.
On the issues on your side, was the pension issue really going back to your full-time employees without pensions and addressing that? And on their side, why, or if there was, a problem with full-time and a problem with the backup crews, what was their issue with that?
Well, a couple things. You know, anytime you're transitioning from one benefit pension program to another, it's difficult. It's difficult for the people that are being impacted by that, in this case the officials. And you have to understand that. And I think that's why we came up with a compromise that makes sense. We would do it over a 5-year period and replace it with a defined contribution program, which is what the owners were proposing from the beginning. And defined benefit programs, they're out of date. They don't exist in the industry going forward. And I think it was important to end that and to move into the defined contribution program. And that was done successfully. On the other issues, I think the officials just wanted to make sure it was done right. And we wanted to make sure it was done right. And we'll work together to make sure it's right. I think that's the best part about an 8-year agreement, is that we can work together to make officiating better.
Do you have any concerns about the referees coming back this weekend being a little out of shape, or?
No, they were very anxious to get back on the field. We talked about that extensively. They also, I know how much pride they have in what they do and how much they do to prepare themselves. I'm certain that they're in shape. They made that point, that they were all in shape and ready to go and anxious. And when we reached a basic agreement around 8 o'clock last night, the focus turned to how fast can we get the officials back on the field. It certainly was a priority for me to have all of the games officiated with the regular officials starting tonight. And they worked hard to do that. And I salute Gene Sterator and his crew for stepping up and saying, let's get ready. Okay?
A lot of upset Packers fans out there. What would you say to them? And is there any concern that the focus on Monday night's game will continue throughout the playoff race and could wind up affecting the playoff race?
Well, you know, anytime you have these controversies, they stay with us. We have them in the history of the NFL, the tuck rule. I mean, there are a lot of calls that are looked back in history. That's part of sports. It's part of the NFL. You would, again, like to try to avoid those, and you try to do everything you can to avoid them, but they're going to happen, and they'll happen in the future. And it's just something that I know the great Packer fans, as frustrated and as disappointed as they are in the outcome, they also understand that that's happened over decades, and unfortunately will happen going into the future. Okay?
You've got 8 years of refs and 10 years with players. It's going to be like these long deals.
I think it's important, Andy, for the future of the game. I think when you can do these long-term agreements, they give you the ability to plan going forward, and they also give you the ability to put arrangements in place that I think give security, in this case, to the officials going forward. Maybe help more on the economics, some of the things. It gave us a longer period of time to transition out of the current pension program. So I do believe that they're good for all parties. But in this case, we want to do what's right for the game.
How relieved are you to put this behind you?
Do I look relieved? Yeah, absolutely. These are difficult, and I will say this. You know, again, my involvement was really over the last month or so. They were always respectful. They were always with the best interest of trying to do what was right for all parties, but with a real focus on the game and making sure that we did the right thing for the long term of the game. And I respect the officials for that. I know that was the owner's interest, and I think we got there, and I'm proud of that. But I'm also tired. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
All right, that was Commissioner Roger Goodell. Last night, NFLRA President Scotty Green reacted, saying, quote, "Our board of directors has unanimously approved taking this proposed CBA to the membership for a ratification vote. We are glad to be getting back on the field for this week's games." The NFLPA and Executive Director Demore Smith released the following statement this morning. "Our workplace is safer with the return of our professional referees. We welcome our fellow union members back on our field." Even President Obama weighed in on this matter. His press agent, Jay Carney, saying, quote, "The president's very pleased that the two sides have come together. It's a great day for America." Let's now bring in Albert Breer, who's been following this story since the referee lockout began in the spring. Albert, how much did the Monday night game play into the timing of this deal and getting it done?
Well, I communicated with a couple owners this morning who, they both told me that this deal was going to get done, but it certainly turned up the urgency. And I think all you really have to look at is the hours that were put in over the course of the last 5 days. They met on Saturday and Sunday. Both those sessions were about 8 to 9 hours apiece. On Monday, they communicated by phone. Monday night, the whole thing happens in Seattle, with the Packers and the Seahawks. And then suddenly on Tuesday, they went for 17 hours. And then, turned around and yesterday went for another 15 hours. So 32 hours in 2 days directly after that Monday night game tells you all you need to know. The urgency was certainly turned up. I think they understood that they couldn't go back for another week with the replacement officials. And in particular, it would have been very difficult for them to send a replacement crew to Lambeau Field and into that environment with the Packer team that's not very happy with them. And, of course, on the other side, a Saints team that's been upset with the league for quite some time. So I think the best way to characterize it is the urgency was there. And that they felt like where, maybe before they really would have wanted to get this wrapped up in time for week 4. It almost became a need after what happened on Monday night.
That Monday night incident seemingly gave the officials leverage in negotiations. How much credit can we give to them for reaching a deal?
Well, I would say this, their ability to go to the mat and not just be force-fed what the owners wanted to force-feed them should be commended. And I think that the ability of them to work out a deal that works for them and that works for the league, certainly is something that you can look at and say that both sides made out in this. And, I think at the beginning of this process, if you had asked anybody, if there was one area where the NFL wasn't going to budge, it would have been on the retirement benefits, and that they were resolute and they were determined to switch everybody over to a 401k. The fact that the officials were able to push this thing to a place where the existing officials were going to get 5 more years of their existing pension, which Roger Goodell said it there. The owners felt was outdated. Certainly was a win for the official side. And it's I think a big part of this is their determination to get it done. And their willingness to give up paychecks certainly was recognized by the league, and that was what allowed them to gain the leverage that they needed, because that created a situation, of course, where the league's image started to be on the line, and that's a big part of what pushed this thing across the goal line.
You just touched on the retirement and benefits. Were there any other sticking points that were kind of holding things up?
That was the only one that, I think if that had been solved in July or August, we would have had a deal in July or August. The economics here were always workable, and I think that the working conditions and the desire for the league to get better officiating, to create a situation where the officials are going to be better across the board, that stuff was always workable. And it wasn't until earlier this week that they got the issue of the backup crew settled. As Roger said, that the full-time issue. The full-time official issue was out there until the very end, but most of that stuff was really workable throughout. It was the pension thing that was holding everything up, and once the pension thing got done, it was all downhill from there. And like I said, I think the league feels like it was able to create a situation where officials are going to be pushed to be better on a more consistent basis, and I think the officials felt like they were able to enter into that part of the agreement without giving up too much job security or money. So in that way, it's a win-win too. And I think any time that you can take an entity like the NFL, into these types of compromises, it has to be considered a win for the youth.
This agreement is 8 years. It's the longest between the